The more I would rebel against him as a teenager, it would push him away in a way, but he always came back. He was an absolute monster. Early childhood, I never really had a normal one. When I was 3 or 4 years old, my mom met my stepdad. For years, he was my best friend. He was the only father figure I had in my life. And I remember the first time things changed. I was in 3rd grade. He was a very man. It was always towards my mom, not really towards us. When I was about 8 years old, it started becoming more towards the kids as well. I remember the first time he started to me. It was very early morning. I was laying in bed with my little sister. I just remember smelling like work clothes. I was very confused. I didn't know why I could smell him. It kind of all started clicking that he was touching me. He had his hand down my pants and he was me. I feel like that day, everything changed in my life. I went to school that day and I acted like everything was normal, but I just remember looking at all the other kids like, okay, there's a big difference between all of us right now. And I just felt very disconnected from other kids at that point in my life, which is a very early age to start feeling disconnected from your peers. But after that first time of him me, it was almost a constant for 5 or 6 years. It progressively got worse. He was grooming me. He would take me to McDonald's alone without my siblings, or he would take me to the mall and he would get me a new pair of boots, or he would get me a bunny or something like that. And it was all because he was just grooming me. He always me when he thought I was sleeping. I would hear my door creak open at night and I would know kind of what was about to happen. And he would do that 5 times a week for years. It was almost constant. He was very to my other siblings, but it wasn't to them. It just depended on who it was. My older brother, it was physical. My stepdad was a narcissist, is a narcissist. So he just loved power. He wanted to hold power over everybody. And my mom, she tried to protect us as much as she could, but she, in her situation, she is in a marriage. She didn't know the extent of all the abuse. So she doesn't know exactly what's going on. My mom worked overnight shift, so it was very easy for him to commit his on me because she wasn't there. At one point, he just started getting more bold. It's almost like he wanted to get caught, but he never did. He wanted to get caught, so he would start me under the covers when we were having a family movie night in the living room, or I would take a nap by my mom and she's sleeping next to me and he would start me while I'm laying right next to her. So he just really got off on the thrill of it, the power. I suspect that he was also cheating on my mom. I mean, he just was a evil person. He kept a lot of Benadryl in the house. He was putting it in my mom's food, so she would be constantly tired, have constant naps when she was home. I feel he was putting it in my food. He wanted me to sleep extra hard at night so he could do what he wanted. Most of the time, I knew what was going to happen, so I was not able to sleep. I was kind of just waiting for his next attack. Worse memories I have, I remember I was watching a Kids' Choice Awards on my TV and I fell asleep and I woke up to the smell of in my room, and that was the first time that he to me. He did that, and that like broke open a whole new level of abuse for him. So he did it often. That's what he would do. He would me after that. He would insert his fingers in me. He would take my sleeping hand and he would place it on his private. And when it came to the thrill of it, it was even while we're all on a family camping trip and we're all sleeping in the same tent, he would just abuse me wherever. It didn't matter. The worse my abuse got, the worse everybody's got. He would walk into my older brother's room and just like choke him out and then drop him on the floor and then walk out. He would abuse all of our animals from a very young age. I remember him. He would beat all of our cats. He would torture them. He had an obsession with dogs, and he would also just torture them. I mean, he would beat them so badly that the dog could barely walk. And he tried to make himself look like such a hero to all of our family friends or family members. He loved to throw these big parties and invite all these people over and make himself seem like he was such a family man, but he was never a real family man. He was beating one of our dogs so horribly, and I went outside and I put myself in front of the dog and I said, okay, well, if you want to beat the dog some more, then you're going to have to beat me. And from that day, he stopped talking to us. And the more I would rebel against him as a teenager, it would push him away in a way, but he always came back. He was an absolute monster. Growing up with him, it was really difficult to watch that he would do to my brothers as well, because I feel like my mom felt very lost. What are you supposed to do? He has most of the financial power. The kids are, I mean, when you're in a relationship, it's much easier said than done to leave it. I will never hold that against her in any way, because she herself was a victim. I mean, he was physically abusive with her, so mentally. He would just beat my little brothers to a pulp sometimes. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and my brother was maybe 3 years old and he pushed my little brother down a flight of stairs. There was another time with my little brother that he threw him onto his little toddler bed and it split my little brother's front tooth down the middle, and he had to get the tooth removed because it became so infected and he just couldn't have it anymore. It was just so many things like that where he couldn't people enough. He was very mentally manipulative. He would manipulate me into thinking like, oh, this isn't what you think. I would never hurt you. But then he would continue to hurt me. I did end up telling my mom when I was 16, and she immediately called the cops, and he went to jail for about a year. We had a court trial, and the jury said that he was not guilty. I remember how heartbreaking that was for me and how heartbreaking it was for my legal team as well. We all just cried because we couldn't believe it, because the jury said that they believed me, but they said, there's no evidence. But how is a little girl supposed to have evidence from being 8 years old, So he, to this day, still tries to get a hold of my family, tries to harass us, tries to get a hold of my little brothers. He will tell them that we brainwashed them and that when they're of age to come find him and come talk to him because he's not a monster, but they have their own stories from him. So there's not much brainwashing when you abuse all of us. There's no getting around it. And as an adult, the sticks with me and affects me in ways that I had no idea was possible. For the longest time, I feel like it maybe turned me into like a teenager who was I was over myself because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. That's how I thought someone was going to love me. And as I grew up, I realized that that was a sign of some pretty traumatic in my childhood. I ended up being told that I have PTSD from it because it affects me to the point where I will have flashbacks. I will have flashbacks where I freeze up and I can't move. I can't stop thinking about it. I am basically back in whatever scene is playing out in my head. Whatever act that he did, it will absolutely freeze me. Being as a child is one of the worst things that could happen. When I told my mom about it, she dove pretty deep into addiction. She had a past of addiction. I feel like my stepdad really drove her into it because he also had a past of it, and with how horribly he was everybody, I feel like my mom really felt like she didn't have a choice. She was just trying to find a way to cope with the life around her. So she made some pretty poor choices by diving deep into addiction, and that made me and my little brothers feel very alone. We felt like we really only had each other. We are just three kids who all had some severe trauma that wasn't being dealt with. My little brother had behavior issues. I was taking on the role of being mom in the house because I didn't really have another choice. When my mom was very into her addiction, we ended up getting removed from the home. We were put with my older sister, which she was also in a relationship, in a marriage. We were just it was a small house, and it was, us three kids being shoved into a house that already has 3 to 4 children, 2 adults. My sister's husband was also addicted to, so he was screaming in our faces, screaming in my sister's face. He was horribly physically to her. It almost felt like we were put back in the same position. I felt like I needed to protect my older sister sometimes, so I would pick fights with her husband, and my little brother would end up protecting her. And, if he was trying to get too physical with my sister, we would intervene because we just didn't want to see the same pattern of we didn't want to watch it again. There was a time in high school when my stepdad was still around. It was before I told my mom about anything. I got my first serious relationship. He actually is my husband now. I told him everything that my stepdad had been doing to me. I feel like that was my first phase of healing because I had never spoken about it out loud. When I told him, he was obviously very supportive. He was telling me it's not your fault. It is, you have to turn him in. And I remember telling him if you tell anybody about this, I will break up with you. It just unlocked something for me because after that, it felt really good knowing that someone hated my stepdad for the same reason that I did. A lot of people did not believe me. I was not very liked in my small town that I lived in. So a lot of the parents looked at me as a very troubled child. He loved making people think that he was the hero. So the few people in town that knew him were oh my goodness, he would never do something like that. No way, she's lying. That was really hard, and it was a halt in my healing because I was looking at everyone around me why don't you believe me? What makes you think that I'm a liar? And then when we took it to trial and he was found not guilty, that made me feel so stupid. I was very, very depressed because I came out about I lost trial. We got taken from my mom, and I felt so lost. I just cried all the time. There were so many times I wanted to just myself that I couldn't handle the pain. Then I ended up finding a really, really good group of friends towards the end of my senior year, and they just helped me so much. They believed every bit of my story. They never questioned me. They always allowed me to speak about it when I needed to. When I went to college, I ended up making a very good friend. It was almost like she was my mirror. I had never felt so seen and heard by someone. And that was really, really empowering for me. I've recently started therapy again for my abuse. I'm really trying to dig really deep and see if I can heal some of my emotions that come along with, because as someone who was as a child, it affects your relationships. It affects you emotionally. I get very triggered at very small things, and I feel like I'm being backed into a corner. I feel like I'm an animal backed into a corner. And so I'm trying to heal myself from the inside out so I can have the healthiest marriage possible, so I can be the healthiest parent possible. If you don't handle your trauma and really just take control, then it will consume you for the rest of your life. And I don't want that for myself. So yeah, I'm trying to heal. If you're experiencing, it will be okay. It is such a cheesy thing to say, it will be okay, but it will be okay. You can speak up, and there is so many communities that would help you and have open arms. And don't ever let the people who don't believe you get to your head, because like I said, ignorance is bliss. People don't want to hear about it, but it happens every day, and you are not alone. You will never be alone. And there are so many people who love you and would much rather see you stand up for yourself.